Maneva na sema PENDREAM TV. PENDREAM TV de osia dem yopo.
You are most welcome to PENDREAM TV, the only channel that brings you the best and latest updates in politics. If you are new here, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell for more updates, like and also share to other members to watch as well. You can equally leave a comment at the comment section after watching or send us a voice note on our WhatsApp number 0277 128 777. Thank you.
Joyce Bawa, good morning. You're welcome.
Good morning.
To the show.
Good morning to the delectable Sewa. I'm here.
It's good to have you.
My pleasure.
And you were looking very nice on Tuesday.
Well, you know, the competition is very keen. And somehow I just said to Aisha, I just want something unique. Yes, and I think that's all. And she asked me what? I said, you know me, anything. Just fully covered, decent. The only thing I didn't want was to have a full-length skirt. I thought that for a change, a three-quarter skirt would be great. And I think that's about it, nothing more.
And you've gone viral since then with
very
your photo.
Simple, nothing more. We didn't even know what to do with the little flap on the top because she gave me this little sort of busty of sauce. And so I actually took the photo she sent me. I sent it to my sister. And so we had to decide how to have it. And it was the best. And then she kept asking me, so Auntie Joyce, should I put it on this way and put a little button? I said, yes. Don't do anything. Just leave it as it is. I think sometimes everything works for the common good.
You looked lovely.
Yes.
I'm sure that you've heard that many times.
I think I loved it too.
And congratulations on a successful event, the inauguration.
A
very beautiful spectacle. I'm sure that you've heard many feedbacks.
Yes,
what amount of work went into it, and who was behind all of it?
A great deal. Nights, hours, painstaking planning. And I think one thing I must say is that for the first time, I saw a whole architectural design of what the stage should look like. Literally, like designing a home. And he had a sense of where the seating should be, who should go where, and how it should go.
When you say he, who? I
think that this was actually set up largely by Standobi.
Okay.
Remember the first time the conversation came, it was myself, Omani, him, His Excellency President Mahama, and a few others. And then all he said was, you know, I'm going to deliver a world-class production. You know, if you know Stan, I always tell people that Stan selects his clothes very carefully. For a man, he's a guy who likes to preen himself a lot. And so when you look at him aesthetically, it is just how he lives his life. But you see, funny enough, he works in a lot of chaos.
Right.
You know, a lot of chaos. But you see the beauty about Stan, and I decided to find out a few years ago why he's so methodical, why he's so mathematical. I knew that, you know, well, we all knew Stan from Joy FM. He's a media guy, he's a comms guy, he's a PR person. We all used to all of that. He writes very well, he's a great editor, name it. You know, if you want someone to fix anything, just call Stan and you know you would have it done. But then I tried to have a conversation with someone who was his classmate and knew him quite well. Then she goes, oh, but you know, in secondary school, Stan was a science student. I thought you were joking. She was like, yeah. I said, oh, how? She said, oh, yes, right up to A-levels. And you see, for me, maybe because I have a son who is also mathematically gifted, I tell people all the time that I take it from my father's day, because my father at a point was a math teacher. When you can think in figures, you are very methodical in everything that you deliver. For those of us who can think in letters, we're usually very verbose and we try to explain things all the time and in so many words. But for people who are mathematically, you know, gifted, there's a way that they use figures, a sense of methodism. They're very technical, they're very organized. They do things very well. So several years ago, there we were trying to interview a set of new staff for this institution I used to work for. Someone appeared from the University of Central with a first class. And then there was a gentleman from a very obscure part of Ghana who came in with a third class. And he had read mathematics at the University of Ghana. I stood up and we gave him the job. Almost 14 years later, he is the mind keeping that institution together. I've always believed in what mathematics can do for an individual in any sphere of life. Check those science students who came to law school with us, or those physicists who came to law school. Just look at how they do stuff. and you realize that they are totally very different. I think that this was a great choreographed project. He took it very seriously. Don't forget that we literally were babysitters of the office of the former president. And I always say we're a club of 3. Be that as it may, we have survived.
A club of 3, you, Stan, and
Dr. Mani Buama.
Dr. Mani Buama.
This is the original trio. And I still remember our conversations about whether or not Mr. Mahama would contest again, and whether or not 2020 was the time to go for it, or to wait till 2024. We've come a very long way. I always call myself the addition to the evil twins, because those two are like twins in a pod.
Right.
You know, they can plot anything, they can discuss anything. They literally are lip brothers, and I think that I'm the younger sister who joined the 2 men. And I think it's worked beautifully for us in our dedication, in our loyalty, and in our commitment to our boss. And I think our talents have come together very, very well. So on this occasion, I must confess that Event PR, and you know, they carried us from day one.
Right.
Yes, from day one. When no TV station, media house, or radio station was even interested, they took it all the way to the 2024 elections. You know, each time I speak to the very early days, I get very emotional. It is actually to the glory of God that today we can all sit here to celebrate this once onerous and arduous task, but now that has actually ended in this beautifully successful story.
How much of the work, I mean, you've talked about all that was done by you, but how much of the work involved the outgoing administration? Did they partake? Did they contribute in any way?
I think that we worked very closely with the State Protocol Department, but I believe that in terms of the arrangements, in terms of choreographing, in terms of the production, largely the mastermind behind it must certainly be Mr. Dogwe. And of course his team of workers. And I believe that Auntie Afi of Jandel actually also had people who, you know, she has a very huge entertainment industry and a huge decoration and event management industry. So I believe that in the background, they were there as supporting to deliver on the outcome. But I believe that all in all, most of the work was actually done largely by the incoming administration, more or less. You know, as a party, we have enormous talent. And that's the beauty about the National Democratic Congress. A lot of multi-talented individuals who have all come together. And when you look at how this campaign outside of the event of the inauguration was actually choreographed, you'll realize that most of the volunteers were these young, bright, smart people.
Who invited the heads of state?
Usually it's a combination.
Okay.
But most of the invitations will definitely be coming from the incoming administration. We had traveled to at least 9 countries in the week running up to the inauguration, so that he could formally thank them for their support and actually formally invite them also to attend. I believe that mostly what we saw is the goodwill that accompanied Mr. Mahama's return to office.
And on that, were you surprised by the turnout? We understand that about 20 heads of states were there.
I wasn't surprised at all. You know, as an individual, and I believe from my very early memories of this whole, you know, period, I'm sure that I've known Mr. Mahama maybe literally for all of my life. I have always believed in him, that there was something that is very unique and special about his leadership qualities. That he may not be a leader in the aggressive and boisterous sense that we are used to, but in all his demure and cutesy approaches, he must be a great mind. You know, he reads a lot. He's a voracious reader, and he's a very experienced technocrat. And you know, when you listen to the conversations leading up to the election in particular, some of the key decisions that were made even at IPAC were influenced by him. And the best of Mr. Mahama is that on a very little matter, he will invite 3, 4, 5, 6 people, and he'll pick your thoughts on just about anything. And then eventually, he will put all the views together, and he will arrive at just what he thinks is the right thing to do. The one thing I like about him is when he's at the last word, he will say to you, look, I've been here a long time, and I know these things. And somehow, it always works. You know, look, Sewa, we are spiritual people. Let's agree that God literally loves some people maybe more than others. or God actually has a certain destiny that he attaches to some more than others, or in many ways, God definitely still works in the affairs of men. And last night I told the First Lady, Mrs. Lordina Mahama, that I'm actually tapping into her blessings, not for myself, but for everybody else. Because note that in every successful conversation, there's also a strong partnership of support, of advice, and good counsel.
Right.
Many a time we forget the backdoor people because we always pray for destiny helpers. But I say it in another way, that even the servants bring their destinies to bear on the boss's own destiny. And together, you're able to create a certain synergy. So does a man's family. So does a man's wife and his children, or a wife's husband and her children. I think that that is just how God intended for this beautiful, unprecedented, and unparalleled history to happen. Look, I always said that we're on the cusp of doing something great. And I believe that we achieved just that with the glory of God. You know, even the day when the results were coming in, Mr. Mahama was shocked. Even though he knew, he was very optimistic. You know, a few days too, we'd all talk about maybe a concession speech, the possibility of one. But he was very optimistic.
I mean, not to jump the gun, but now that you have mentioned, the results, because I want us to focus on the inauguration and discuss in detail the speech of the president. But speaking of the results, I am sure that you have heard your colleagues on the other side say that looking at the numbers, the NDC didn't appreciate much in terms of numbers, and that their supporters just didn't come out to vote. So yes, the NDC may have won, but the numbers aren't anything to write home about.
You see, we will not be taking moral lessons from a failed administration, a failed political party, a failed political tradition, and a failed democratic party. You know, I don't want us to even focus on that. Let's focus on the narrative. Let's focus on the outcome. We beat them fair and square. We beat them down and out. They really have to start to learn to be a little bit more humble. I believe that if there's any lesson we've all taken from this election, we ought to respect the will of the people, respect the electorate, respect those who make us who we are. You know, I tell people all the time, Sewa, I've worked in many amazing environments, many places. The sorts of platform that politics affords us must keep us very grounded and humble, because it gives you a platform like no other. But for politics, how many interviews would I have with you? And of course, I remember my very first interview on any television station was with your sister Nana Banamwa when I was working then with the Ghana Shippers Authority. I didn't even then know that I would ever actually be occupying the space that I do. Your boss's success would rub off you any day, any time. Your boss's good will rub off you anytime, any day. Your boss's goodwill will help you even shine. But your personal attributes would also help your boss in many ways. And I believe that on this occasion, the NDC prosecuted a very strategic campaign. We had taught this country 3 consecutive times in one election cycle. In the aftermath, in the run-up to the main campaign, we had 4, 5 teams, one led by Mr. Mahama himself, the second one by his running mate and now Vice President, Professor Nana Opoku-Agyeman, and the third one led by the party chairman, the Honorable Sedum Ketia, and then the many others, one by the National Communications Officer, one by the Deputy Communications Director of the party. It was a multifaceted campaign. We left no stone unturned. We worked very hard for this victory. On this occasion, credibility, trustworthiness, reliability, affability, modesty, and a strategic campaign message worked in our favor. Let nobody who has failed to deliver after 8 years try to give you a story or to change the narrative. This plot ain't about the New Patriotic Party. This plot is not about former President Akufo-Addo. It is not about former Vice President Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia. And you saw that moment when the former Vice President paid abeyance to John Dramani Mahama. That photograph speaks volumes. That on this occasion, my brother was the better man, and he won.
Okay.
It's sportsmanship.
Okay, let's come back to the inauguration. And before we get into the speech by the president, there are some concerns raised about the visible possession of a firearm by the Burkinabe head of state. I am sure that you have read and listened to some of the concerns. Even Kwesienin, who is a security expert, speaking with my colleague Nadede yesterday, said that it was a breach in protocol. Were you worried as a team seeing that visible firearm?
So we had actually visited him in Burkina Faso.
Okay.
So I figured that him and Mr. Mahama had very good working relations. They had very good diplomatic ties. That this is a man that for many years, I had never met him, but I'd heard how he had referenced late former President Jerry John Rawlings as one of his mentors. And in many of his speeches has sought to emulate that example. You know, on this occasion, whatever the reasons were, don't forget that we were naturally not in charge of security, for example. I mean, the first time I actually saw him was when he appeared on the screen to pay his homage to President John Dramani Mahama. But you see, Sewa, look at the applause that greeted his arrival and approach to the dais. You see, there is something about strength of characters and the strength of a leader. And you can tell that young people like to interact with these sorts of leaders. And of course, certainly, I don't think that he intended to use it for any purpose other than maybe personally to defend himself in the event. Because remember, he's a military guy. You know, it's very possible the gun probably didn't have any pellets in it. None of us would know. I have listened to many schools of thought. I think that, as they say, the rest is history. I don't want to put too much premium on it, but if there's anybody who probably can convince him to return to democratic rule, I'm sure the guy is John Dramani Mahama. Let's see how events unfold.
So at no point was the team worried seeing him carry that fire?
I don't think that anybody, you know, except for those who were in charge of security, and maybe when you meet them, you can ask them. Because personally...
Who was the police?
Oh, the police were there, the military was there, the immigration was there.
But as a very crucial part of the president's team, were you not worried?
I don't believe that immediately that anybody even noticed. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
You know, most people probably didn't even pay attention. And don't forget, he had a huge retinue of his own military staff that were actually working with him until he got to that last point. But I also do know that he's a very warm-hearted leader, and I know he shares very warm ties with President John Dramani Mahama.
But subsequently, after seeing the photos and the concerns, what does the team make of it? So what has the president said?
You know me when I would not give you an answer. It is not a conversation that we've had. I know that man, Traore, is not in any way going to try and harm anybody, that he was just wearing his typical daily uniform. And I may not want to repeat the history of Ghana itself here. Don't forget that years ago, when we were all probably very young kids, late former President Jerry John Rawlings literally appeared in the same way in many pictures and at many events, if you remember. So, you know, the military coup leaders have a certain outlook. They're very different from their democratically elected leaders. So let's just allow that to remain as a rather unique part of this beautiful inauguration. Okay. The important thing is that everything went beautifully. You see, when God decides to bless you, he will make it so beautiful that it would confound men, it will elude women. It would continue to be a very, very unique experience for a very long time. Right. And I saw an interesting post that said that since Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's election, very few leaders have garnered 57% in any election. So this election was won by the good Lord and the great people of Ghana. They must have had a very good reason why they wanted to overwhelmingly support the National Democratic Congress and its candidate. It must be a very humbling experience. And I know that unparalleled, unprecedented, and historic as it is, all of us are very, very humbled by this. And look, we had a great team going into the election. Look at our members of parliament. Look at the commitment. Look at the dedication. Look at how they crisscrossed the country. For the first time, you had MPs leaving their constituencies and traveling the length and breadth of Ghana. You had them all over, across this country. We worked very hard for what actually was encapsulated in this very, very beautiful, aesthetically modern inaugural ceremony that we had. I would not take anything away from it. And certainly the narrative must stay on the page that this was an election won on the backs and hard work of a great leader and great leaders and fantastic campaigners. And we had a fantastic message.
Okay, let's come to the speech, the 7-page speech of the president. He said on that day that he will be focusing his efforts on 4 critical areas, which include economic restoration and stabilization of the macroeconomic environment, improvement of the business investment environment, governance and constitutional reforms, and then accountability and the fight against corruption.
Yes.
I want us to take it one after the other.
Yeah.
Let's start with accountability and the fight against corruption, because oral seems to be in the news very lately, and they've been trending. You are very well aware. And many are confused about the mandate of oral. What are the terms of reference for oral?
You know, look, very, very straightforward. And on the campaign trail, you can cross-check. In each of the 275, now 276 constituencies, all that Ghanaians were asking for was transparency, more accountability, and largely a better and stronger fight against corruption. You know, listen to the fact that the preamble to all of our constitutions since the 1968 Constitution speak largely to accountability, transparency, and above all, sincere and equally acceptable societies for us as a people. Don't forget that corruption was a big part of the last few years. Enormous nepotism that actually bred corruption like never before, involving huge sums of public resources. On the National Cathedral alone, we've expended close to $60 million with nothing to show. On PDS, we expended almost $12 million with nothing to show. Indeed, we lost the Millennium Compact, which was actually going to fund electricity and power distribution in our country because of clanism and a fight within the nepotistic administration that the erstwhile administration was leading. We have the issue to do with the Kwalugu Dam, a matter that is actually very close to my heart as a person, because it would have served largely regions across the white and black Volta. Imagine that we had the Kwalugu Dam. It means that we can cultivate food all year round. The only reason why we are unable to do that is water. We were told by the then candidate on the other side of the NPP that the biggest intervention that they have made in the northernmost parts of Ghana is the Kwalugu Dam. $11.8 million later, there's nothing to show. In a debate on one of your sister platforms, we were told that they had expended these resources on topographical and topological arrangements. Who does that?
So what exactly is oral supposed to do?
So oral is supposed to be a preparatory team to receive as much information as possible whilst government sets its administration in place. Whilst we are working to harness what goodwill we have, we must also clearly demonstrate in a very public way our commitment to fight corruption.
So and they're going to be collecting information?
They are literally to collect information.
And they're not going to be working with any powers?
Their powers are simply that. Receive information on the sidelines of the transition team. Don't forget that there are many committees within the transition. And so the oral is part of these committees on governance in particular, receiving information, because first, you must preserve evidence. Secondly, you must also protect witnesses. Thirdly, you must also create an avenue where well-meaning Ghanaians, citizens, can bring information and be happy to do so. Look at the composition of the team. Don't forget the Honorable Ablakwa, a man who's been in this corner all these years, largely in support of the NDC, in support of John Mahama, in support of the campaign, a member of parliament himself. Indeed, he chairs the the Parliamentary Assurance Committee, and so has always been at the forefront of this fight against corruption. It is chaired by him. All the information he was getting before, he was getting them without any terms of reference.
So on what legal backing are they supposed to be doing these things? Are we going to be seeing, a new creation of an anti-graft body to back oral?
We are going to very soon have the Attorney General in place.
Okay.
That's the first point of call. We've gotten the Government Council in place. The next thing you're going to do is that you're going to have the Special Prosecutor's Office. There's also a decision on whether to retain that office or not. But Mr. Mahama has spoken about governance, and that constitutionally, we are actually going to strengthen all the anti-corruption governance institutions. Civil society is another strong voice and pillar in the fight against corruption. And you've heard them all welcome the terms of reference of this particular composition.
So Oral's job ends when?
As soon as the Attorney General is in office, they will hand over their report. Indeed, as soon as the Attorney General comes, he will receive this report. It is now their responsibility to gather information, to investigate, and decide on whether or not prosecutions are supposed to be the next
Right,
step.
so for clarity purposes, Oral ends when there's an Attorney General.
Absolutely, certainly.
And
their mandate actually is supposed to deliver on the sidelines of the transition committee. So their report at the first point of call will be part of the transition committee's work.
Okay, but I'm sure that you have seen concerns that these things that the Oral preparatory team is doing are things that can be done by the police, can be done by YOCO, can be done by the Office of the Special Prosecutor, and other institutions.
If those institutions were not so strongly, heavily burdened by over-partisanship, you think they would not have been doing the job? The Special Prosecutor, we had the first one, that was the Honorable Martin Amidu. How did he leave office? Ingloriously, and resigned, and told us that former President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo was actually more corruptive than the people he was prosecuting or persecuting. And then subsequently we had the Honorable Kisia Jabe, who himself has not had it easy. So I believe that there's so many bottlenecks. One of the best things that has happened since the change in government, Sewa, has been the fact that everybody is now openly relieved.
The
People
heads
are
of these
free to
institutions,
talk and have liberty so to do.
The heads of these institutions, Joyce, is the president looking at keeping them?
You know, that is not my decision or my call to make. I am sure that the president, in his own wisdom, in consultation with the many teams and many advisors that he has, will be deciding. Look, we mean business. And if we stem corruption, if we reduce it even by 70%, Sewa, I am betting you that the many people who go to sleep on an empty stomach will have something little to go on. I've counted a few things, right from the cash receipts all the way down. Tell me, imagine that we could even retrieve part of these monies. Can you imagine what they can be used for? $58 million on that cathedral. Think about it, Sewa. Agenda 111 has been left hanging. We need 1.4 billion to complete. A wealthy nation is also a healthy nation. So health facilities are important. But health facilities need a lot of resources, money to set them up, to construct them. And so when we have these conversations, know that if we can fight and succeed in this fight against corruption, all of us, you and I, will be better off. Go around the regions. And you see, I feel very strongly about two things. One is the fight against corruption. Secondly is job creation. These two things actually seem to threaten and undermine our democracy in ways that you never imagined. When those young children, youth, applauded the Burkinabe leader, people were surprised, but I wasn't. People want to see dynamism. They want to see a different kind of leadership. If there's anything that I take away from this re-election of President John Dramani Mahama, and of course Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman, is the fact that they have young children in that age category who are also looking for these same jobs and opportunities. We want them to hope again. We want them to dream again. We want them to believe in Ghana. So when Mr. Mahama ended his speech on the fact that Ghana is once again open for business, that stood out for me. Check the foreign direct investment over the last 8 years. Many of the investments have left. Go to the Western region, home to most of Ghana's natural resources. Where are all the investments? Where is the promise of the oil and gas find? Today we are struggling for gas, struggling for oil, when Mr. Mahama left behind thermal power plants that are multifaceted, can use both gas and light crude oil. And government spends all these huge sums of money on matters that are not priorities, matters that would not put food on the table. Huge sums of money wasted with nothing to show. We are hugely and heavily indebted. Ghana is actually currently unable even to go and borrow from international markets. We still have the DDEP. We have a poor and bankrupt economy. And largely the cedi is struggling even to compete against other currencies. These are very serious matters. So when Mr. Mahama speaks about economic restoration, Sewa, that is just how to describe it. We need to restore, we need to reset, we need to woo back the investors. We need also to build back trust in our nascent democracy, because most of our youth are very apathetic suddenly. There must be a way that you restore hope, and you cannot do that if you don't restore this fledgling economy.
Okay.
It is actually the barometer on which everything else rests.
I want us to talk about the president's 120-day contract, which he promised while campaigning, and look at the corruption fight in that.
Yes.
But before then, I mean, when there were concerns raised about the oral team and inclusion of women, I saw what you wrote about it, said that you had noted it. It's been about 3 weeks, and we haven't heard anything. What's happening?
So there were many other governance committees on the sidelines. We had the Venerable Dr. Valerie Sawyer serving at a very high level. We also had the Honorable Marietta Brew serving on the governance team. We have many other women on these transition teams. And when you go there, you see them. The Secretariat, there are many young professional women handling the Secretariat, for example. So basically, you know, look, these things come with all sorts of ramifications. But I say to you every day, the biggest celebration worthy of mention any day is the nomination and eventual confirmation of Professor Jenan Opoku-Agyeman as Vice President of the Republic of Ghana.
Right.
That is the biggest constituent. And all of us must, in any small way, never lose sight of this new dawn, this new era, where Ghana has actually shown the way by picking up not just any female, an accomplished female academic, not just of local, but also of international repute and standing. A great woman by all standards as Vice President of Ghana. Many great things are happening for the sisterhood. Let's be very sincere and be honest about that. And many other appointments will follow. Look, the President of Ghana will be making in excess of over 5,000 appointments at the local government area, in governance, many institutions, in banking, in oil and gas, many sectors, many. So there are so many appointments to be filled. And you heard about the first set in the Jubilee House, for example. We have the senior advisor on governmental affairs, our big sister and boss, Dr. Valerie Sawyer, an accomplished academic herself. We have the former Attorney General, the distinguished Marietta Brew appear, and she will also be there also. So we have many of these very distinguished women. I've told you, there's one thing that the NDC can boast of, that is talent and a great skill set. You've seen our young people, you've seen our middle-level people, you've seen our leadership. This is one great political party, the one that is actually clearly more representative than any other political party in the history of this country. Look at the map of the elections. Look at the members of parliament. Across the 16 regions of Ghana, the NGC enjoys enormous support. We don't take this lightly.
Okay, let's still talk about the fight against corruption. And now with reference to the 120-day social contract, item 13 of the contract says that the president will institute inquiries and or forensic audits into the following matters of public interest, and then lists the collapse of the indigenous Ghanaian banks and financial institutions, illegal printing of money, the National Cathedral scandal, illegal inflated single source contracts, the COVID-19 expenditure scandal, PDS, Ijapa, SML, the ambulance spare parts deal, the Polugu Dam, which you say is very personal to you, the Galamsey fraud, missing excavators, the Sputnik V, bus scandal, and the others. Is the oral team the one expected to handle all of these investigations?
Don't forget that the bodies that do investigations largely are actually on the instructions of the Attorney General and Minister of Justice.
Right.
So like I indicated earlier, as soon as the Attorney General's appointment comes through, whoever occupies that high office will be the very first to instruct for these very formal investigations to commence. That is when people can then be invited to answer questions. That is when people can then start or institute prosecutions where they're required or where the Attorney General, in his own wisdom, deems it fit. Indeed, these are all matters that are very close to the hearts of many Ghanaians.
Right. So these are not specifically the things that the oral preparatory team is looking into.
Preparatory.
Yes.
Kono
They are not things that they are looking
they
into.
will receive information on all of these things.
Right.
It just actually makes the work of the Attorney General easier. It also means that time no day. We want to focus on the things that matter. We want in very timely fashion to deliver on whatever promises we've made. Remember that the people who left largely because they failed to deliver. Mr. Mahama is on a legacy agenda, okay, to make a mark. He is a statesman who comes to the job with enormous experience. And having traveled the length and breadth of Ghana, we all know what matters to the good people of Ghana. Nobody will forgive us if we fail to investigate, if we fail to recover where necessary, and if we fail also to commit to making sure that we do not repeat the history and mistakes of the past administration.
Okay, but is it that, judging by this 120, day contract with the Ghanaian people, that by the 120th day, the audit reports of these scandals will be ready for the public to see, or the investigations and the inquiry will begin after the 120th day?
Once you have a report, it's very easy to audit. Indeed, the matters that you've mentioned are all matters that came to our attention because they were audit reports, if you remember, whether forensic or otherwise. And the work of the Public Accounts Committee, for example, exposed most of these, financial loss issues. So there are already reports, really, many of them. So all we need to do is to consolidate these reports, to reconcile them where necessary, and certainly to start to ask questions about where all these monies have gone to.
So
it's
when will we start getting that information? Within the 120 days or after the 120
Well,
days?
within, and we've started. It is why the terms of reference for the oral committee are very straightforward. And you know that in the next few days, in 2 weeks, Mr. Mahama has promised that he will have the full complement of his cabinet. And it also tells you that it's because of the relevance and importance of these matters to do with the fight against corruption that we have named no mean a person than the former Attorney General of Ghana to be legal counsel at the presidency. That should tell you that this is very serious business. So Mr. Mahama would have immediately someone advising. I've told you that Dr. Valerie Sawyer is an academic and a lawyer also. And certainly we have these very great and beautiful minds who will be there, and we have the Chief of Staff in place. So there's already a lot of work going on. And I have no doubt that in the 120 days, look, that is a social contract. So we must at least be willing to deliver. And people must be assured, doubly assured and reassured that this is a man who comes to this job with a commitment like no other. And he's hit the ground running. Yesterday was his first day at work. You saw the nature of the meetings we had, mostly bordering on what? Finance, on energy, on power, and the critical things that actually should kickstart the work of any new administration. The most important thing is to get the economy running. Secondly, is to work on power distribution challenges. Thirdly, is to continue to ensure that in the next 2 weeks, he has the full complement of his cabinet in place so that we can kickstart the work that the transition team will be handing over to the new government.
All right, for those who are asking, we'll certainly talk about the power crisis before Joyce leaves the studio. But how do you respond to those who say that Operation Recover or Loot is just a message to make the masses and the base happy? Because, apart from the Smarties Bar scandal under the John Mahama administration then, where monies were recovered, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't recall any other contract where funds have been recovered, which have been bloated and have been recovered back to the state.
Well, do you remember that there was a national service scandal under Mr. Mahama, which was fully investigated? You remember that there was a matter to do with, there was another one that was even investigated and people were prosecuted and even served prison terms, if you remember.
But we weren't able to recover state funds.
Well, in some cases we did.
That's what I'm saying. I know of the Smarties Bar scandal.
Oh, there are many others that maybe I probably don't have immediately at my fingertips. But there were many of those sorts of situations. And if you remember, one good thing of Mr. Mahama's administration, and maybe we all forget, is that all these matters were investigated by the Attorney General at the time. And none of these things were swept under the carpet. And I don't recall Mr. Mahama coming out to tell you and I or anybody that he was sweeping anything under the carpet or that he was clearing any of his appointees. And I recall that that was one of the strongest selling points for us in this campaign, that Mr. Mahama's very, very worst record on the fight against corruption was actually the very best for President Akufo-Addo, now former President Akufo-Addo. You know, Sawa, Ghanaians are very, very conscious. There's a certain new consciousness. People know what they expect of their leaders. People know what they want. Don't forget that the NPP assumed that on the back of all their failings, they would somehow survive. But look at how resounding and overwhelming the rejection was. A complete annihilation, a complete repudiation of everything New Patriotic Party. And if you look, because you also go back to matters within the other Mahama administration, imagine that the levels of corruption stories that they used to whip on the back of those stories. Make comparisons now. The one lump of the $58 million expended on the cathedral alone literally wipes out every story in terms of finances that you speak of, even under Mahama. You see, Mahama and Mills had something going. They at least made attempts to fight corruption.
This government didn't? I mean, the outgone government didn't at all?
Even in the Sona, he told you that everybody that he cleared because they had been investigated.
But he wasn't doing the investigation, was he?
Well, we heard about Professor Frimpong Boateng's report, for example. We heard about the matters to do with Charles Bissell, for example. We heard about the fact that many government appointees in the S1 administration, and you heard President Mahama speak very boldly to the fact that if my appointees are coming into office to come and do galamsey or even engage in any form of mining, then you know that you don't have a place in my administration. Okay. And these are matters that bother the good people of Ghana. You know, Sawa, I don't want us to sit here and compare peaches and apples. John Mahama is a man who has clearly been vindicated on everything he did and everything he told us.
So Joyce, is it a firm promise by John Mahama that state funds would actually be recovered? And I ask you this specifically because, yes, you say that there are some other instances where funds have been recovered, but let's take the past administration, for instance. We know that the case of Atuasian, it took us about 5 years to secure a conviction. And we didn't even get anything of the stolen funds, a chunk of it. We didn't get it. And it took about 5 years. How are you promising these people, the Ghanaian people, that truly, and Mr. Mahama has what? 4 years to be in office. We know how these processes go, how long and dragging they can be. And in this instance, the persons who are named have the right to go and challenge the surcharge. What is the firm promise, really, that you're going to recover some of these funds for the state?
Sewa, to all my years of experience as a lawyer and to you as a student of law coming in very, very soon, the wheels of justice, no matter how slow they grind, they will eventually swing towards something. But there's one thing you need to know, that a lot of these examples you're giving, they lost properties. If you remember, their properties were confiscated to the state. For example, the state auctions of these properties at high value sometimes. They recover these monies. Maybe what you should be telling us is that in future, you want to see documentary evidence, okay? That when these matters are being prosecuted, when these matters are being tried, when these matters are being discussed, Ghanaians also want to know what has been recovered and how. I think that whatever assets are confiscated, whatever assets are actually being sold off by the state in the course of these actions ought to be made public as well. And I do know that this time we must carry the general public with us. And in carrying the general public, I hope that we'll continue to actually also have conversations about just what is being done and how it is being done. You see, beyond the processes within the courts, for example, there are also the other conversations going on. There is also the strategy that you must adopt. So where monies are recovered, for example, in the case of the bus branding, you saw how it was done. The repayments were done. We saw the figure, we saw the amount, we saw the valuation report. Mr. Mahama has spoken also about the new government valuation entity that he will be introducing, the new fiscal policy where the recklessness of government borrowing will now be checked by Parliament. There is a lot in store, but I am hopeful that those who will be taking up government communications as we go into government will ensure that on the back of whatever decisions and policies are being made, that there is also a strategy to keep the populace informed each and every step of the way. Make no mistake, this fight against corruption has just started. It will certainly be one that we intend to win.
Okay, but I like that you admit that the wheels of justice grind slowly sometimes, but certainly it will take us to where we want to get to. But would you then disagree with those who say that, maybe in the fight against corruption with this whole oral thing, you're just sending a dream to the ordinary Ghanaian that, yes, because from the way the promises are being made, it appears that in the next 3 months, in the next 1 year, in the next 2 years, state funds will be recovered because a picture has been painted that all these corruption scandals under the outgone government will be recovered as soon as the president takes office.
Would you, for example, not want to know how we arrived at all the monies paid to David Ajayi, for example? Would you not want to know? Do you not want to know that if he's been paid in excess of whatever it is that he's done, that he'll be able to return the balances, whatever is outstanding to the state coffers?
But that's not the promise that you made. You said you will recover the funds. You didn't say that you're going to tell us how the monies were paid to him.
Why? Because if you investigate, what are you investigating? You are investigating first and foremost to gather evidence. You are investigating to challenge that whatever payments have been made were illegal, were unlawful, and ought not to have been paid. And once you establish that prima facie case, you then go on to go and do what? To recover. That is the process. And that is a process that every Ghanaian is expecting. And that is even a process better than what you were promised in the past. Even with the Office of Special Prosecutor. You heard about how they went after Madame Sister Dapa, for example. You saw the prosecution that took place in court. We remember her very hot exchanges with the lawyer, Martin Pebu, for example, on the premises of the High Court. Look, there are ways in which we can fight these things. What happened to all the monies that were stolen, even by the servants in Auntie Cecilia's house, for example? What happened to the monies that were found in her own possession? They were confiscated by the special prosecutor. What I am telling you now is that I believe that what you are asking is that how will you know? And I am sure that we will be putting together a very good communication strategy as we go forward. Certainly these monies will not go to waste. How can you lose $11.8 million in Palugo example and have no, dam to show for it? We must find these monies. We must recover these monies. And certainly if we even have to set up serious anti-corruption courts specifically to work on these matters, then so be it. So let's see who becomes Attorney General.
Is that what the president intends to do?
The president has beautiful intentions, great intentions. And I have no doubt that Ghanaians want to see us deliver on the promise to fight corruption, to recover wasted state resources. Don't forget, you mentioned the banking crisis, for example. And that is actually one thing that is on the hearts of many Ghanaians. Look at the number of jobs that were lost, Sewa. In some cases, couples, husband and wife, both bankers, lost their jobs in that rationalization. And if after all these years, you and I can only speak to the matter of Mr. Atuesian and his bank in particular, something must be wrong with our society. And we know that this is one of the things that in the next 120 days, a conversation will be taking place about these banks, for example. So, Sewa, it is a day at a time. It is work in progress. One thing I can be very, very confident in is that Mr. Mahama has given us hope. There's a lot of optimism. There's a lot of reassurance. And with that reassurance comes with enormous responsibility.
All right.
Don't forget that on governance, we're also looking at the constitutional review process.
Certainly, and that's then my next, because
Absolutely.
I told you we're going to look at the
Yes.
speech of the president.
Yeah.
And he talks about governance
4
reforms.
thematic areas.
Yes, so
economic restoration, for example. He speaks about it beautifully.
we will get there, but let's now focus on government reforms, governance reforms.
Yeah.
What exact reforms is he talking about?
You know, let me use the level of partisanship in our government institutions. That is the first step. That we must, of course, take a very close look at our governance institutions. You see, there's something that this overly partisan environment has done. It is also why it has bred so much corruption that all of us did not even anticipate. That when the English dictionary talked about nepotism, it didn't talk about 1 or 2 of your family or friends operating. It speaks about when large numbers of family members operate in government to the point of presidential daughters and children. Then you have a big problem, because even investigating these things becomes a big challenge. When your cousin has served as finance minister, even until he overstayed his welcome, when he himself is in a conflicted situation where he owns a bank, an investment bank, and continues to get business whilst serving as finance minister. These are all matters the Ghanaians are interested in.
But Joyce, you're also related to the president. Does that mean that
Absolutely.
you shouldn't receive any appointment?
Absolutely. There was just one of me. And before Mr. Mahama even became vice president, I was a very, very active member of the National Democratic Congress. Like I said, there will always be overlaps.
I mean, yes, you were an
And
active member
remember
of the NDC.
that there was
Wasn't Ken a member of the NPP as well?
And in fact, a financier of the NPP. But he babysat Akufo-Addo until he was made finance minister. Should he then not have been more diligent?
You advocate that no relative of any president is given an appointment?
That is impossible the world over. But ask yourself, how many relatives? Should the president's wife and children? Should the president's brothers and sisters? Should the president's daughters and sons? Just imagine that for a minute, Mr. Mahama wanted to bring all... I am actually an extended family member, to put it mildly. So just imagine that his immediate family members were all going to serve at all levels of government.
So it's okay for the president to appoint family members, but not
there is a level of reasonability.
Right.
There is a level of logic. And using myself as an example, how many of us were in government? Certainly you would have president's friends. I mean, who comes to work with your enemies? Nobody does. Remember that governance also comes with a huge machinery behind government. Many people who support at all levels. I'm sure that many people will have different relatives at different levels. Members of parliament, members of the district assembly, members in office in government, wherever. My sister, it is the numbers. It is a sheer magnitude of the family and friends that former President Akufo-Addo came into office with. President Akufo had his brother as his defense minister. And why not? His brother was a qualified and competent pair of hands. Why not?
Okay.
That would definitely happen. And certainly, and look, make no mistake. I believe that I'm well qualified to serve at any level. And I've had many
Ken says the same
friends.
thing and his lovers.
Yes, there are many other people beyond Ken. There was Nana Bedi Etuo with his father and mother.
So it was the numbers for you?
I've told you, nepotism is not about one or two people. It's a description of a whole logistical chain.
Okay. Will the election of MMDCs happen under President Mahama?
If anybody has a single opportunity to do so, I believe there will be President John Dramani Mahama. I don't know what the decisions will be going forward.
Will it happen?
Maybe it should happen. Maybe it's time. Maybe it's time.
Because when he talks about governance and constitutional reforms...
The whole decentralization process has to be looked at pretty much like tax reforms, for example. And I've been talking to Professor Esther Ofeabuaji, for example, a local governance expert. I've had conversations with Professor Kwamina, who I call a doyen, of course, of our local governance structure. Remember that Dr. Kalisus Mahama is coming in also as Executive Secretary to His Excellency the President. And the President himself is an expert in this area. I want to see many reforms too, like many other people. But I want to see less focus on the partisanship. Look, in the last 8 years, and I'm delighted that there's a communication actually relieving all of them of their duties, really. Go around and look at the system. For the very first time, we haven't felt the strength of local governance or the decentralization. Irrespective of how the MMDCs were appointed, their impact has been negligible.
But Joyce, I mean, still on these reforms, governance and constitutional reforms, there are many who say the president is too powerful. And yesterday, you talk about the revoking of appointment of these MMDCs, and he did all of that with just the pen. And I'm sure by the time we finish this interview, I finish the show, another group of people will also be sacked or fired, And all of these are due to the fact that the president has a lot of powers. Does the president, looking at the fact that now he has 2/3 majority in parliament, is he willing to let go some of these powers?
Let me tell you something. Beyond the last 8 years, Sewa, when has this conversation about extreme executive powers deposited in one individual been such a hot conversation or hot topic?
Well, I have had that conversation quite a few times.
So the question is that, like I say, you see, to everything, there's a scale of justice.
Do you agree the presidents in this country have had too much power?
Oh, yes, certainly.
Okay.
The Constitution actually gives them too much power. That is
Right.
true. But you see, there's also fairness. It is why the president has to have the Council of State. It is why the president has to have Parliament, for example. It is why you have Parliament being able to set up all these committees and commissions of inquiry within the parliamentary structures. It is also why the Speaker of Parliament has been working very hard also to bring in new standing orders so the parliament can take its oversight responsibility very, very seriously. You know, look, there is a quid pro quo that has also set a certain tone. But like I said all the time, when a president is an individual, pretends to be a transparent person, pretends to be a believer in accountability, for example. You see, you don't see the powers that much because in the consultative process, in how consultative, in how open, in how amenable, in how equitable the system is, you will fail to see that much power. But where you see a president appointing so many people, for example, to the judiciary, as we saw over the last few years, and doing so even in the dying embers of his administration, then certainly people question the levels of the power. When you see the president appointing his biological daughters and sons to certain key prominent positions, then you start to wonder. When you see the president refusing, for example, to pay heed to request that it is time for you to at least reshuffle your administration, reshuffle your government, that 180 ministers is just one too many, then you know you have a challenge. And these are the issues that we're talking about.
It wasn't 180 ministers. It was 130.
Well, whatever. I mean, after
but I agree, he's had the highest number of ministers.
Absolutely, and he makes no apologies. He made no bones about it. He didn't even try to even make amends by even saying that, look, I've heard you at a time when the economy is in the doldrums, when the economy is in ICU. Let me at least try and even meet you halfway. No. He continued to pack the courts. He continued to pack the seat of government. He continued to receive huge sums of money to fund this very expensive government machinery called Office of the President. You know, Sawa, I believe that there's a good reason why John Mahama has received this overwhelming endorsement.
Okay. Well, if you just tuned in, I'm here with the special aide to President John Dramani Mahama, Joyce Bawa Muktari, who is also a lawyer. Joyce, I want us to still stay on the governance reforms, but you just talked about the courts and the fact that the president, before he left, President Akufo-Addo packed the court. We know that he received a petition before leaving office to sack the Chief Justice, which he threw out. Is this something that President Mahama, because we also understand that he has, some petitions are coming in, is it something that President Mahama will be looking at, especially because members of the NDC, some members of the NDC have consistently accused the court of being biased, including the Chief Justice?
Sawa, it is within the right of every citizen of Ghana who deems that there's been any breach of ethics whatsoever to petition the appropriate authorities. That is something that the Constitution enjoins everybody to be able to do. The second thing is that many citizens have cause or reasons to be dissatisfied with many of the governance institutions. And you know, it is not just us saying it. I remember years ago when the Minister for National Security actually had reason to address judges, where he spoke also about the fact that they ought to also demonstrably be fair in the dispensation of justice. So this is a matter that's a matter of public record. The Afrobarometer report has spoken about how people no longer have any confidence in these governance institutions. That is also a matter of fact. So certainly you don't expect the president or the former president now to be so dismissive. If for nothing even, give them a listen, give them a hearing. It happened in the case of Madame Charlotte Osei, one that I believe was a very, very unfair circumstance. And yet we had to live with it because the president in his own wisdom felt that this was what he was supposed to do and what he wanted to do at that time. And
will the president consider the removal of the Chief Justice, a petition?
I've told you a petition would come. Like every other petition, it will be handed over to the appropriate quarters. There'll be due investigations and there'll be an outcome. You know, I don't want to prejudge any of these things. I don't want to preempt what the president intends to do. But we must, as a matter of justice, as a matter of fairness, as patriotic citizens, improve upon the public perceptions of our governance institutions. I'm sure that even if you ask the Chief Justice herself, she will tell you that she will rather lead an entity that is actually trusted, that whose fairness is not in doubt, whose approach to delivering justice or dispensing with justice. And you see here, we're not talking just about political cases, for example. We're talking about the generality of justice for the generality of the populace. That is what we're talking about. You see, let's not personalize these conversations. When the views are sampled, when the polls are being done, They are sampling the views of ordinary Ghanaian citizens. The cost of justice delivery is another conversation that has come up. These are matters that you and I know. And these are matters that scholars have spoken about at length, that people are dissatisfied with the output of the judiciary, the justice delivery system. It's a matter of public opinion, not mine, not yours.
Okay. There's so much that I want to talk to you about when it comes to these governance and constitutional reforms. But let's talk about ministers. Because of time, I have just a couple of minutes to wrap up the show. The president promised that he's going to work with 60 ministers. And even though, I mean, that's going to be the leanest or the smallest minister list, well, we've had a couple in the past, not so much, but 60 ministers. And many assume that this is going to be very difficult for the president, especially now that he has 183 ministers, something that I doubt he anticipated. How difficult has it been? I mean, we understand that everyone is lobbying. Are you lobbying?
You know, for me who works right under the baobab tree, and I say this without any fear of contradiction, I have never asked President Mahama for anything. It's been a privilege and an honor to serve a man of such enormous, enormous glory of God. It's been an honor and a great privilege. I mean, I probably would have missed my blessings many times over. Don't forget that every work environment has a lot of difficulties, many aspects that most people never get to see. I've probably had many occasions when I probably almost left the job, and because I am one person who has many options. I could even go and manage my mom's school. But I stayed on because I believed in the project John Dramani Mahama. I have never, you'll be surprised, that I can analyze all sorts of things for John Mahama and never ask for anything for myself. And I hope that I remain that way, very
Which
true to myself.
ministerial position are you looking at?
I have not thought about it because, you see, fortunately, I believe that looking at my qualifications, I'm someone who can serve in many, 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 many capacities. And so I leave it all to the glory of God and what his steps are for me for the next few months. But many people are lobbying. I mean, we all get lobbied for some weird reason. And so I don't envy him.
So you haven't lobbied at all?
No, absolutely not. Why would I? Why would I? I trust his judgment. I believe that
But
anybody...
do you expect an appointment?
I haven't even thought about it. You know, everybody asks me the same question all the time. My sister, if I didn't even have any formal appointment, it's been an honor and a privilege. And I think there's so much I can do from this point.
Would
Just
you be
so many
surprised
things.
if you get an appointment?
I wouldn't be surprised. And I wouldn't be surprised if I didn't either. Same. You know me well enough.
When should we expect the president's list?
Well, he's told us that this should be done in 2 weeks. And you know that there are very, very key challenges right now. I am hoping that very soon we should have at least the finance minister ought to be announced. We should have some of the key appointments being made over the next few days, I'm sure. I'm looking forward maybe to the energy minister, judging by the urgency and the emergency situation that we've actually inherited. I am also looking forward to the Attorney General of Ghana. That should also come up maybe in the next few days because that's another key appointment. And the Defense Minister, Interior. There's so many of them to think about. But don't forget that many other ministries were also created by the outgone administration. And when Mr. Mahama speaks to governors, these are some of the areas that we are also talking about. Because you see, think about it. We must, as a matter of urgency, look at the fact that this is a new era. He actually has a big opportunity in agriculture, for example. And I love the fact that I met a gentleman in the media who's actually a rice farmer of enormous persuasion. And this is the Ghana that we are actually walking into now, where you find people, practitioners, lawyers, doctors, with many other interests. Mr. Mahama himself has actually taken to farming on a very large scale. And there are many other people in this value chain. I have many young friends who are part of my mentorship program, who are into agriculture in ways that I never even imagined. You see, I am actually the expert that I am because of the many young people that I have under my sleeve, that I engage on all facets. If Mr. Mahama can achieve a great agric minister, for example, and do the great things that he intends to do for agric, Sewa, if we can feed ourselves, cut back on importation of foreign goods. And I heard about a very interesting breed or species of rice grain called naper and how it grows just in any climate. If we can start to use science to back agric in the way that young people actually see it now. And I remember Mr. Mahama saying that he wanted to make agric sexy again to the youth. If we can be food sufficient, end food inflation and high cost of food, feed ourselves and export what we have, can you imagine what Ghana will look like in the next 2 years?
Okay. I want us to talk about, we'll finish the conversation with the energy crisis, but, you know, we saw a kitchen cabinet list, and there were some 7 appointments that were made. Many people expected to see your name there. I expected to see your name there, and we didn't. I know what you're going to say, that even if you don't get any appointment, you are happy to serve the President Mahama, but were you surprised?
No.
No.
I knew, I mean, it had been in the discussion box for a very long time. So
Okay.
I was expecting it.
Okay. The president's promise that he's going to run the leanest government, some say is like he following, quote unquote, the trick by his predecessor, which is Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, who says, I won't have so many ministers, but I'm going to make certain appointments to cater for the people that I'm unable to appoint. For instance, people talk about legal counsel to the president, and they say it is a needless appointment because the president cannot be sued. The Attorney General, per Article 88 of the Constitution, does these things on behalf of the country. So then, what really is the need of that portfolio? The
same constitution also speaks about direct state principles, okay?
Right.
That enjoins the president to be very responsible. It enjoins the president to be mindful of whatever legalities of his actions. So most often than not, you find that the president actually needs good advice. I have said that maybe...
Isn't that why the Attorney General is there?
But to have an advisor very close to you is also very important.
That office is a creation by Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo. And I remember some persons in your party said that it was a very needless creation.
You see, let me say that I have no doubt in my mind that the person that John Mahama has appointed to that particular office is a woman of enormous experience and repute. So you should know that this is not a consideration that has come lightly. Knowing fully well the numbers of emergencies that have been left behind, serious external debts, very serious international engagements, international breaches, many international cases that Ghana has won and lost over the last few years. Look, there are going to be many legal tussles to now start to unravel. It is actually very important that not just anybody occupies that particular unique position, but a woman who comes to that job with enormous experience and expertise, and coupled with whatever work the AG will be doing. If we're going to take your argument to heart, then it means that we don't need a special prosecutor or the office for that matter. We don't even need a Special Prosecutors Act or the office for that matter. We don't need, for example, the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice. But these are all arms of governance that are created and built into the Constitution to deliver largely on one thing: stronger institutions, strong legal principles, a fair justice system, to have a president who works within the remit of his presidency and nothing more. That is also very important.
Okay.
And as they say every day, if you want to run a lean government, note that there are many other ministries that were created. Sewa, many. The Ministry of Transport, where I used to serve, now has a Ministry of Railways, has a Ministry of Aviation. And so these are the things that we need to do. So remember that on the back of the leanest government is also to build efficiency into our governance institutions, to look at reforms not from the perspective of former leaders, but looking at reforms in the eyes of a man who has lived in this governance structure for a very long time and comes with enormous experience. But remember, there are so many parastatals, many banking institutions, many boards of state-owned enterprises. There are so many appointments across the length and breadth of the country to be made. There have been many other creations even by this government. So there is enough to go around everybody. And I don't think that there's any need even for jostling. But what is important is that we must, of necessity, take protection and preservation of the public purse very seriously. It saw the back of Akufo-Addo and Bawa. And if we don't take it seriously, the same would happen to us. Look, Ghanaians are not going to joke with their democracy. And like the young girl said in that advert, we know that in 4 years, we have an opportunity to go out there and elect a new leader if we are dissatisfied with the current administration.
Okay, yesterday we were told of a crunch meeting to solve our energy crisis. Yeah. Will the lights remain on?
Oh, yes. You see, finally, we were looking in the crucible all these years ago. There was always this conundrum about whether there was excess of power, about whether or not it was a money issue, about whether John Mahama fixed Dumso or didn't fix Dumso. I'm delighted that, Sewa, today that you and I are here, everything has been laid bare. You know, I used to tell everybody that as soon as this government leaves office, we'll see the length of the snake. Don't forget, in the run-up to the campaign, in the run-up to the election, there were conversations about the energy sector debt in particular. That the energy sector levy that was left behind and inherited by this administration and capped to borrow monies that they didn't use for anything, certainly didn't use even to stem the indebtedness, that it was always going to come home to roost. Today, we've seen all the chickens right on the table. And yesterday, I walked into the room to see all these experts, heads of all the institutions within that sector, that I probably hadn't seen most of them in the last 8 years, because, you know, when you're in opposition, even though you're a professional, you become almost like a leper, and most of your friends don't want to hang out with you. They were all in that room. And the many who were taunting us 8 years ago, I know some, I won't mention names, who were sending me audit reports about just how bad the institutions they inherited were. Today, those audit reports pale in comparison to the failure of that sector. But I know one thing, that there is a deep sense of goodwill and there is enormous commitment. And I know that most of these independent power producers know, for example, that now that there's a new sheriff in the saddle, they know that there will be every effort to negotiate, to calm the waters, and to be certain. Because remember that at the bottom of the $10 billion industrialization drive, that is the big push agenda, the effort to create jobs also means that we must keep the lights on.
But Joyce, why are we learning of this now? The NDC was part of the transition team. Is it that this information was kept from the transition team?
As soon as we went into the transition, this conversation started. And I believe that you heard the Honorable John Jinapo, who actually chairs the energy committee of the transition, speaking to this matter. You also heard about the fact that a team had to travel to go and engage some of these suppliers, for example. You saw Mr. Mahama engaging independent power producers even in the course of the campaign. You saw him when he met Ambassador Palmer, the U.S. ambassador to Ghana.
Yes,
and
we're
all
talking
the
about the looming energy crisis.
Absolutely.
But just 2 days ago, from the inauguration, we are being told that it is that serious, we may not have power in the next couple of days.
If you didn't ask your past administration, you should be asking them, why didn't they tell us? You see, we told you that they were being inscrutable. We told you they were being dishonest. We told you that they were hiding a lot of stuff. We told you they were not being transparent and accountable to the good people of Ghana. This speaks volumes. But I know one thing, that judging by the goodwill that has propelled us into office, the nature of the seriousness that Mr. Mahama has attached to this by setting up a 12-member committee chaired by Mr. Julius Deborah, our Chief of Staff, I know that the solution is in the offing, and certainly the lights will stay on. You see, look.
So we won't have any moment of doom so at all?
We don't intend to, and it shouldn't even happen. And I know that if we start to pay them, if we start to focus on what is a priority, if we hadn't wasted $58 million, we hadn't expended $12 million, we hadn't expended $11.8 million, look at the quantums of these monies. If we hadn't capped the energy sector levy, for example, to go and borrow askance recklessly, without due recourse to the public purse, without any consideration for the common man, then certainly we won't be having this conversation. But make no mistake, if there's any man who knows how to navigate the energy sector, that man is President John Mahama. And I know that this time he is going to make sure that we pay these suppliers. He's going to make sure that we keep a tight lid on it. There is also a lot of waste that we've inherited from this government. So efficiency, a reduction in borrowing, a refocusing on what matters, and on what is a priority is what we need. And that is exactly why we'll have the leanest but the most efficient administration to work not just for us, but in the interest of the good people of Ghana. Look, I told you about Pasa, for example, in the Ketekrachi constituency, where they have something called low current, low voltage. We still have a country where people steal street lights and poles. All of you can help us to stem these things and build the efficiency that all of us want to see. And Mr. Mahama has told us he will need the support and help of the good people of Ghana.
Okay.
So if a citizen sees somebody climbing a street light, for example, report it. And we must also do some great advocacy to stop citizens from doing this. But of course, these are all livelihood-dependent issues. And so when people start to see the impact of the implementation of these people-oriented policies, some of these things will end, and there will be a new era ushering us into an era of prosperity and hopefulness. And I know that John Mahama and Nana Jane would deliver just that.
Okay, 2 more questions before we wrap up the interview. Will you fulfill your promise of scrapping e-levy and the betting tax, the COVID levy?
Now that we have a 2/3 majority, it tells you that Ghanaians want that to happen. And whatever Ghanaians want, we must give them, for as long as it's in the interest of the country. And remember, e-levy is not just taxing mobile money. It is also about financial inclusion for the less privileged. And so when you started to tax it, what did it do? It left those people in that catchment even poorer. It made the hardship even worse. And remember that in most jurisdictions, Ghana has the highest levy.
How soon will these taxes go?
Parliament has just been reconstituted. In the next few weeks, I'm sure you'll hear about far-reaching tax reforms that do not encourage people to avoid tax, but will encourage people to work in the interest of paying tax. That the GRA itself must actually be repositioned, because the Ghana Revenue Authority itself has used methods that are unorthodox, harassing people, forcing people,
You're talking
shutting down
about
people's
tax
shops.
reforms,
Yes.
and you're not telling me if they're going to scrap these taxes that
Why?
you promised.
Look, how much do you get from e-levy, for example? It is on the drawing cards.
E-levy,
The
COVID levy, about 6.2
Exactly,
billion.
the COVID levy. COVID is long gone. Why should you even have such a levy?
So it
and
will go?
Everybody who comes to Ghana, ask me why we still buy papaya.
Will it
And
go?
of course it will go.
Okay.
Certainly. And if we are able to carry out the far-reaching tax reforms that we consider as important, people will be happy and willing. Look at the informal sector, for example.
Okay. You know, we're done with the interview, technically, but I still have a lot more questions that I want to ask you, but because of time, I'm unable to. But, you know, when you were talking just a while ago, you talked about how, you know, being in opposition, there are some people who didn't even want to hang out with you. You became lepers, quote and unquote, because you are not. You are living a very good life, because I knew you were in opposition and you didn't look like a leper to me.
But you also knew my private business, and you're always
well.
there. So you're one of the biggest beneficiaries of that private entity.
That's true,
And
I must say.
Absolutely.
But
and you know that I have a great team, great supporters, and I work very hard.
That's
I sleep
true.
very little.
That I can attest to it.
Yes.
But how difficult has the last 8 years been for you and the now president?
Are you sure you want to do this?
Yes, I want to know.
You heard Mr. Mahama speak about the issues to do with hampers, didn't you?
Tell me about yours first.
Same. Don't worry, I don't want to go into that.
No. We are interested. My viewers are interested.
Are they?
Very briefly.
Why? It's normal. I mean, look, I wouldn't even walk into offices, because you'd walk into an office and you'd probably embarrass somebody, because it is you coming to talk to them. I mean, I lost many opportunities because people thought that you were too political. It's very normal, you know, and I believe that, look, it is why everybody must find and have a plan B no matter the circumstances. Have a great family. Focus on the things that matter. I am blessed that I have a great family. I have a great husband. I have great siblings. That is half of it. And then have a good profession. Build something small on the side. Because you see, like I say all the time, politics is a hobby. Some come into it and they are successful. Some come into it and they are not so successful. And it's also not something that is for life. Sometimes it would end abruptly. So just imagine that, you know, you're a member of parliament. You wake up in the morning and you've lost your seat, for example. What do you do next? You have a profession, you rely on it. You have great friends who have businesses, you'd go and work for them. You see, Ghana, unlike many jurisdictions, has one challenge. So when we left office, my classmate, who was then spokesperson to former President Goodluck, became the president of the Bar Association in Nigeria. That will not happen in Ghana. These are the things that we must change. So I don't speak for myself because, like I say to you every day, I will survive anything. It is how I'm built. I'm very purposeful about a lot of things that I do. But of course, I'm also not someone who is prone to sharing a lot of these things. But those who have experienced it know that for a fact. And I am probably very modest about it. But try as much as possible to have something you can rely on. And you see, when you have something to rely on, you don't come into politics seeking to come and, make great big riches and make a lot of money and focus on the things that don't matter. You will come in to leave a mark. And I look at the life of Mr. Mahama, look at the conversations about public assets all these years later. There's none on him. That is an example that we should emulate. How to serve in public office and come out standing very tall and being able to do other things. But yes, Ghanaian employers, Ghanaian business owners, the private sector should be bold and confident enough to recruit us who have something to offer. And we should not victimize companies that do that or victimize individuals who do that. I think that is where we need to grow beyond the partisanship. In the UK and America and other places, former political leaders are hot cake because people know that you have a certain ethical outlook. Former presidents are hot cake. They speak for huge amounts of money. I mean, Sewa, look at me. I'll fit in anywhere. Why would anybody say that because you are so politically exposed that we shouldn't give you a job as a bank manager or a board chairman of a big international bank or the other? What would you be doing there? There are checks and balances in place. Why would people not want to be associated with people like that? These are the things that we ought to change. Former members of parliament, for example, come with enormous experience. Look, sit with a parliamentary person and hear them quote verbatim from all the acts of parliament. Let them speak to the Constitution, and sometimes they'll do even better than people who are even practitioners of the Constitution or even defenders of the Constitution. There is enormous talent out there, and many talented people also come into politics. It should not be a reason to exclude them from any public spaces for that matter. I think that, speaking for myself, I have been very, very lucky. I pray that same will happen to many other colleagues too. But please don't shy away from coming into politics. It's a great place. And we need more women. We need more females. We want positive females, good energy. I think that in many ways, it was almost as if by being inspired by President Mahama, I have also inspired a whole generation. And many of our women have done just that. I mean, look at all the many great women that we have.
That's true.
I have been mentored by many people. Madame Betty Mould, Dr. Christina Makunyama, Madame Valerie Sawyer, Madame Marietta Brew. There's so many of us. So many. Many. Look at the young ones. All the young lawyers. I mean, Beatrice Annan, Noam Falong, Felicity. There's so many. So many. Shamima Muslim. All of you included.
Right.
I think that something
and you're
interesting
a great inspiration, I must say.
Is happening for the Ghanaian female.
I came to you to mentor me, but you didn't, so.
I offered you great mentorship. I gave you a proxy, my own body double. And I love that you made that decision. And
Thank you.
Great
Thank
thing
you.
to watch.
But has the president moved into the Jubilee House yet?
Well, you know that sometimes these things take a while.
Okay.
Because most often than not, you'll have to change a few things. You'd also have to renovate and undertake certain little repair works and all of that. And then moving a president is also not an easy thing because they come with a whole office, a whole household, a whole retinue of security and many other things that people don't get to see. I'm hoping that maybe this time we should invite the cameras into the seat of government as we go along. Let people join us as we, put the office of the president into shape. And have him moving.
When are you hoping that he'll move in?
I can't say because yesterday, for example, they went on an inspection. I wasn't there, unfortunately, so I didn't get to see what was in there.
Okay.
But I'm hoping the next few days I will go there with my colleagues as well, and then we'll take it from there. But I know that we've started working already in our old office. It actually has some constraints because it doesn't have a very big facility. And so we are actually working there. This morning, he's going to the Ahmadiyya Muslim Mission in Winneba, where there's a conference and he'll be participating. We have other meetings in the noon when he returns from Winneba. So, there's one thing about Mr. Mahama. He has been working since. I don't remember a dull moment.
Has President Akufo-Addo been provided with accommodation?
President Akufo-Addo will certainly be getting whatever it is that the Constitution says we should give him, whatever the recommendations are. And I hope that beyond what happened to Mr. Mahama, embarrassing as it was then and still is, I hope we don't repeat those sorts of mistakes. People come into the presidency and they actually sacrifice a great deal. Having served Mr. Mahama all these years, Sewa, it takes a lot to serve Ghana as president. For the citizens to offer a former president one house or two, I think it's not too much to ask. What President Akufo-Addo and Vice President Mahmoud Bawumia did to John Mahama is a matter that we would rather leave in the books of history. Unfortunate, regrettable, unnecessary as it was, I'm delighted that we came out of it. Okay. There are many things also that are still outstanding. You know, he never got his office, for example. And I think there's even a requirement that they be given a home, even in the places where they come from. Mr. Mahama still has his own house in Bole, for example. He lives in his own house in Accra. He operates from his office in Cantonments, which we pay rent for. And I know because I was one of the very first residents of that office.
Does he still pay his bills? You told me some time ago that he was
and
paying
he
his
himself,
light bill.
Oh, he pays his water bill. He pays to renovate his home. Why? Of course he does. He does. Maybe we should codify some of these things going forward. Because these things, you know, they can be cast in iron. So, for example, we have a former president's bill or, you know, something that Parliament can take a close look at so that we define these things. I mean, every time they recommend to the Emoluments Committee at the dying embers of the administration, maybe this should be done at the beginning. You know, governance is the continuum. Right. And I believe that every day we modernize. And as we modernize, we also start to do things differently and efficiently. I mean, can you imagine President Akufo-Addo leaving office after 8 years at the ripe old age of 80 plus and being left stranded and not knowing what? Look, maybe his children served in government, so they are better off. Mr. Mahama had very young children at the time. You've seen them all. They are all within the ages of 20 and 30. Just imagine what that was.
I cannot let you leave here without asking you about what appears to be takeover by members of your or supporters of the NDC in the various government institutions. And CLOGSAG has had to complain about some of their members being affected. Has it come to your attention and that of the president? What's your take on it? You know,
you see, I know very well that there's been a lot of concern expressed. It's actually why we went out there to set up the security team, I'm sure you know. So it was their responsibility actually to make sure that they take care of some of these things and actually restore order. But you see, Sewa, let's pray, okay? Let's pray and hope that the matters that confronted us when we handed over in 2016 are not repeated. You see, all of this has vestiges in what happened at the beginning of 2017.
But look,
I myself was hounded and my little son's photograph put on all sorts of international platforms because of Ameri and car powership issues, matters that I knew absolutely nothing about. The matter of President Mahama being hounded out of a 4-bedroom government house that they would have lost nothing, allowing him to stay in even for a period of 2 years. And you see, I know, for example, that these are not matters that are sanctioned by the party. Our party chairman, the Honorable Asedun Ketia, actually called for order. I'm sure you remember that. Mr. Mahama, now President Mahama himself, did just that. So we are working very hard to make sure that in future, these things do not happen. But this is the Ghana where people were taking over toilets. You understand?
But yes,
people
it
were
happened in 2016,
people
like
were
you said.
dragged
But
out of
is it
the
something
seats.
I
You
have
remember
said,
the case
Joyce,
of Nanka Bruce in particular? You know, look.
Two wrongs don't make a right. Are you going to condemn what is happening now?
I take these matters very personally. And you know that. As someone who suffered the brunt of most of the negativity of the New Patriotic Party, I don't wish that on anybody else.
But will you condemn what is happening?
Let me tell you that it is under control. It could even have been worse, and you know. Every effort is being made to be measured. But you must always give advice where it is due. Advise persons that in a democracy, such acts should not be tolerated. And that goes to every other person who would be intending to be part of this democracy. You see, when it was happening, people were here, they were watching. Let's not set bad examples or bad precedents. You know that nobody on our side supports any of these activities. Why? President Mahama, you know. Professor Nana Jino Pokwajima, our Vice President, you know. Have you seen us dragging any security men out of the seat of government? No.
Okay, there's a question here for you. Final question before I go from Nadede, my colleague at Star FM.
Okay.
She says, Joyce, ask about the challenge with feeding in the senior high schools because Charles has asked parents to bring food to help with feeding. What is the NDC's plan? What is the government's plan, let me ask?
This is a tragedy of humongous proportions. And for the longest time, the NDC and President John Dramani Mahama have spoken at length about the challenges to do with the implementation of the senior high school system. It is to the glory of God that with a new government in place, Charles is speaking out. Why didn't they do that 2 years ago? Why didn't they do that 3 years ago? Why didn't they tell everybody what was wrong with the implementation of the system? Why did they allow the NDC to suffer the brunt of whatever little criticism they offered? It was actually in our own interest. It was in the interest of the nation. It was in the interest of those poor children. It was actually in the interest of each and every parent of Ghana. You see, Sewa, it is the reasons why I believe that the media still has more work to do. Ask them, and please give me this answer tomorrow. Why are they speaking out now?
Okay,
so they are
that's
telling
fair.
their children
we will ask them,
to
but
bring their
will
food
you
to school.
encourage that decision for children to bring food to school?
Have you ever heard that beyond the little Gary and Cerelac that we all take to augment what is offered, school meals are a big part of secondary education. In fact, in times past, they were a big part of tertiary and university education even. Why should our children who have suffered so much continue to suffer? I know that there's soon going to be a blueprint on what to do with the entire education value chain. Primary, secondary, tertiary, and the rest. So let's wait for that conference to take place.
All right.
And after that, I'm sure that there will clearly be a map. Don't forget that they owe even in MOAEC bills. We never heard that before. They owe even in the tuition fees for free SHS. I hear in the regions of about 2 billion cedis. I mean, imagine. So what were they doing in government, really?
Thank you very much, Joyce Bawa Mokhtari, a special aide to President John Dramani Mahama. I am expecting that she's named minister in waiting for the transport ministry or, communications ministry or one of those. And when you do, please promise that you grant me an interview first as a minister.
You see, I will always grant you interviews.
Thank you.
You are one of those I never say no to.
I agree,
Exactly.
I agree. But this one is a special promise for when you get your ministerial appointment.
Please don't put my boss on the spot. Allow.
Oh, we know what we are saying. We are
allow.
the media. So are you making that promise?
Maybe I should set
you grant
up,
me an interview first.
Maybe I should set up the One Family and Friend Association office and you can come and work for me.
Thank you so much for coming on the
Thank
show.
you.
Thank you for staying tuned. PENDREAM TV really appreciates your time on the channel. Once again, urges the new subscribers to turn the notification bell on so that they'll be notified duly of anything that will be loaded onto the channel. Stay blessed. We have more in store coming your way.
Dedi kama mamena PENDREAM TV ase. Na so far so good. Say open online portal e wo Ghana. Nipa share, nipa follow, nipa comment here. To my best of knowledge, without any biases, PENDREAM TV.